understanding the indictment of Donald Trump and leading up to the takeaway is that simply we're just like everyone else. Donald Trump was indicted late last week by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith. He's scheduled to be arrested in Florida on Tuesday for violations involving the Espionage Act, obstruction of justice, and the willful mishandling of classified documents. When you look over the indictment and you see some of the evidence that has been so far suggested and marshaled forward, the truth is it's not good for Donald Trump. There were clearly documents involved in these boxes held at Mar-a-Lago that should not have been at Mar-a-Lago. There were clearly documents that were of classified nature that Trump knew were of classified nature and held inappropriately. There's reportedly an audio tape wherein Trump says to someone, a guest at Mar-a-Lago, hey, look at this. This is secret. I should have declassified it. I never did. So you probably couldn't get too close to it, but take a look. In that audio tape, should it exist as I just described, it would be obvious that Trump hadn't declassified some documents and was mishandling them in some inappropriate fashion. But understanding that this is not good for Donald Trump is much different than believing this is worthy of an arrest and an indictment. Whether or not it's worthy of the Department of Justice under Joe Biden, potentially jailing his primary political rival for president of the United States. Let's walk through the legality, the history, the evidence, and the precedent of incidences that are similar to the case against Donald Trump. Legally, the case is being made largely under the guise of the Espionage Act. The Espionage Act dates back to 1917. It was, I believe, originally implemented for those who were looking to avoid the draft during World War I, working against the interests of the United States in World War I. The Espionage Act has been criticized for quite some time as being extremely flexible and capable of being used by the government against any party simply which they do not like. The Espionage Act, though, is where the government will attempt to rest their case. The question will be whether or not the Presidential Records Act takes precedent over the Espionage Act. There's something like 37 counts in this indictment. I believe 30 of them, approximately 30 of them, are related to the willful mishandling of classified documents. Now, the Presidential Records Act says that the president has ultimate authority over the designation of whether or not documents are public or private, those documents involved in his office. There is precedent for the use of the Presidential Records Act to keep some stuff within the possession and the ownership of a former president of the United States. A few years back, Judicial Watch, a conservative organization, sought to get their hands on some private recordings, some private tapes that Bill Clinton maintained as president. The story was these tapes were squirreled away. They were hidden in Bill Clinton's sock drawer. But the judge in that case, when Judicial Watch took it to court, said that this was within the sole discretion of Bill Clinton to designate what is of the Presidential Records Act, what is personal, and what is available for public use. The Trump defense has already filed a brief wherein they have invoked the Presidential Records Act. I'm going to read to you their claim. When he made a designation decision, he was president of the United States. His decision to retain certain records as personal is entitled to deference, and the records in question are thus presumptively personal, said the brief by Donald Trump. This is in fitting with the holding of the trial judge in the Bill Clinton case, who ultimately denied turning over those tapes to Judicial Watch, gave ultimate authority to Bill Clinton. Now, again, the government's going to try to get around the Presidential Records Act by suggesting that the markings on the documents when We'll never know what was inside of those tapes for Bill Clinton. But the markings in the documents when it comes to Donald Trump were marked classified or highly classified, and those fall under the Espionage Act. Legally, I think, although we've had different legal experts on this program from time to time, question whether or not this is going to hold water. But legally, I think there's still an argument to be made that Donald Trump, as president of the United States, has the ultimate ability to declassify any document. The purpose of the classification system is to keep people without high enough authority from seeing sensitive documents. There is no one of higher authority than the President of the United States. There is no classified document that would be incapable of being seen or possessed by the President of the United States. And then, by virtue of his office, he would have the power to declassify whatever document. Whether or not he needs to go through some process, file some paperwork, I think is going to be up for debate, up for the court. But it ultimately, this issue of whether or not the president has the power to declassify leads us then to the potential severity of the charges. So I say to you at the top of this, it's not good for Donald Trump. An audio tape of him acknowledging that these are not declassified documents suggests that even if he had the power to declassify, he didn't declassify. It's not good for Donald Trump, but that's not the end of the story. I was pulled over for speeding yesterday. I was pulled over 52 in a 35. Was I speeding? Yes, it was a traffic violation. Was it worthy of the officer's time and effort? Did it accomplish a measure of justice to write me a ticket to get me and others on that road to slow down? That's a legitimate question. By the way, the officer in that situation decided no, it wasn't worthy. He simply asked me to slow down. So is it worthy, even if it's not good for Trump, even if the case is going to be bad for Donald Trump? What is he guilty of? This is where we have to be very real. The left will hyperventilate. The left will talk about the nuclear codes. They will talk about a threat to national security. They'll even imply, and have implied, that Donald Trump was going to auction off highly classified secrets of the United States to the highest bidder, that he represented a threat to the United States. That's hyperventilating falsehoods. It takes only a sober mind, not a partisan, to see that as true. So what is the severity of a case that is not good against Trump? Well, before we get into precedent, let's talk about intent for just a moment. Let's go back to that idea that Donald Trump has the power to declassify, even if there's an audio tape that suggests he didn't declassify. Again, what is the point of the classification system? It is to keep it from people who are not supposed to see it. The intent is to guard America's national secrets. Does anyone really believe that Donald Trump was sharing with the highest bidder or celebrities or anyone secrets that compromise the United States? Does anyone truly believe that what we're looking at here was the plot of a Jason Bourne movie? Does anyone truly believe that this was the beginning of an action thriller, a straight-to-Netflix episode, that what we were truly talking about was something that kept the Joint Chiefs of Staff up at night? Does anyone truly believe that's what this is about? No. Again, common sense, sobriety, understanding. What we understand with the intent of this classification system, that we're talking about the President of the United States, is that it was designed to keep other people from seeing documents. Now, was Donald Trump keeping these documents in some unsafe fashion, right there for anyone to walk in on, for anyone to see? Was Donald Trump flaunting them? There is no evidence to suggest that is the case. And then, in order to understand the severity, we begin to dive into history and into precedent. How serious does the United States government take the even willful, inappropriate handling of classified documents? Here, let's lean on recent history. Sandy Berger was a National Security Agency advisor under the Bill Clinton campaign. Berger had classified documents that he did not have the power to declassify, and took them out of a classified setting. He was prosecuted for this. What happened with Sandy Berger? Sandy Berger received 2 years probation and 100 hours of community service. We can also find other examples in recent history. General David Petraeus, of military fame, during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. David Petraeus had classified documents that he shared. We know that he shared them willfully with his lover, a journalist with whom he was having an affair. He, too, was prosecuted. What did David Petraeus get? He also got 2 years probation and was fined $100,000. That was the extent of the punishment for David Petraeus. And I think what you'll find is when it comes to the mishandling of classified documents, the cases against Berger and Petraeus are some of the harshest punishments. That slap on the wrist, some of the most serious. It's been taken. The mishandling of classified documents. We can go to other situations in recent history. Joe Biden, the sitting president of the United States, was just found to have, we don't know how many documents, in various locations. I believe his presidential office at the University of Penn, his library, a senatorial library, a vice presidential library. Who knew? It's worth pointing out, these were documents from when he was vice president. Again, not the highest of the hierarchy, not the top of the food chain on the ability to designate classifications. Also, he held them in his garage next to his Corvette in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. There are stories Trump is suggesting he has documents also at an office in Chinatown in Manhattan. What is the government's approach to Joe Biden? Nothing. Not only no charges, no investigation. What about Mike Pence, vice president under Donald Trump? After the raid on Mar-a-Lago, Pence says he initiated a review of his documents at home now in Indiana, and he found some classified documents. He then turned them over. Everyone likes to point out the willingness with which Pence or Biden turned over their documents, that Trump willfully obstructed justice and did not hand them over. Well, what's odd about that is Pence and Biden didn't hand them over until it became an issue with Donald Trump. They weren't readily checking all the boxes, crossing their T's and dotting their I's. They were holding them inappropriately, although secretively, for a long period of time, as long a period of time, longer than Donald Trump when it comes to Joe Biden, dating back to his years as vice president. And then he sees, under his own DOJ, the hypocrisy of going after Donald Trump and then turns them over. That's not exactly willful participation, cooperation. Still, no charges against Mike Pence. How about an incident a little bit more on the nose? Hillary Clinton, former senator, former secretary of state, had in her possession 30,000 documents, many of which, we don't know exactly how many, marked secret or classified. It seems to be something that people wave their hand at more readily because they were not physical documents, they were emails stored on her own personal server. She was keeping her emails on her own personal server that is outside of a government classified setting. That's been such a joke. It's been turned into such a joke. And she had hats made up called with "but her emails" emblazoned across the front. When Trump was indicted last week, she put out a picture of herself with a hat, but her emails, LOL'd, and asked for money, used it as a fundraising operation. Hillary Clinton destroyed some of that evidence. That is known with what's called a bit bleach software. Went through the emails, destroyed those that might have had classified markings. We'll never know. Does that sound like cooperation? Or is that obstruction of justice? And what was done in the case of Hillary Clinton? What's the precedent? Well, James Comey, then leading up the FBI, said, we're not going to press charges. It wouldn't be good for America. She's running for president. In my understanding, it's not the FBI's choice on when and when not to press charges. That's the province of the Attorney General, the Department of Justice. But the precedent was set, and under President Trump, the DOJ was not weaponized to then go after Hillary Clinton on these charges, to force the FBI. Despite what President Trump might have said about lock her up, he didn't then, in turn, try to lock her up for the exact same thing that now, virtually the exact same thing now, Donald Trump has been indicted and will soon be arrested. The precedent is clear. The recent history has been laid out. There is no parallel for throwing the book, 30 counts, each carrying potentially 10 years in prison for the mishandling of classified documents, much less pursuing that charge against a former president of the United States. What could go on now? What could happen? Well, Donald Trump has said he'll continue to run for president. Let's look at the future. He will not sit out. If he is convicted on these unprecedented, minor, according to precedent, minor charges, Donald Trump could be convicted and could potentially face jail time. That would not technically stop him from running for president. Eugene Debs famously ran for president from a jail cell, socialist. Debs was encouraging people not to sign up for the draft in World War I. I believe he was prosecuted under the Espionage Act. Debs got 1 million votes from jail running for president. Trump can run for president on the issue of extending himself a pardon. If Trump bows out, Ron DeSantis could run for president on the issue of extending Donald Trump a pardon. Donald Trump could win the presidency. He could lose the presidency. He could not receive the pardon. Joe Biden could be reelected, and we could see a former president pursued to the fullest extent of the law over relatively minor charges. And that leads us to the takeaway. It sounds like an editorialization for me to call this relatively minor charges, but precedent and history tell me that's the right characterization. When we can come up with examples of people who have been prosecuted, they've received 2 years probation, Petraeus and Berger. When we have seen more on-the-nose similar examples like Clinton, there's no prosecution. So why are we seeing the book thrown at Donald Trump for what may be bad, but amounts to a traffic violation? We're seeing it because the United States is quickly slipping into being like everyone else. I have said this so many times on this podcast, and it cannot be underlined and highlighted enough, printed in bold. The United States is a unique experiment in human history. With its constitution, its checks and balances, its various branches of government, its respect for civil liberties, the United States is an aberration. The story of mankind is tribalism and violent struggles for power. In modern times, that has simply been dressed up through fake political processes. We can go throughout history and find easily evidence of political parties locking up their opposition. In fact, it would take me forever. We could talk about Russia and Vladimir Putin locking up people like I want to get their names right. Locking up Alexei Navalny, for one. He actually locked up another political opponent as well. And of course, we know that in places like Russia, Putin regularly gets something like, more than 90% of the vote. It's not just Vladimir Putin. We look across Venezuela. Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro have jailed many opponents, including someone like Leopoldo Lopez, and a judge, a local police officer, a former army general, anyone who opposed them as leaders. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, he jailed Morgan Tsvangirai, a presidential candidate and opposition leader. It's happened in Iran. It's happened in Zambia. It's happened in Uganda. It's happened in Egypt. It's happened in Ukraine. In fact, it's happened all the time. It's not a challenge to come up with other countries where presidents lock up their political opponents. In fact, according to Axios, since 2000, at least 78 countries have jailed or prosecuted former leaders, including, of course, it's happened as well in Mexico. The point is, the United States is different. We have been different. We have been special. Our experiment from its founding was special. But we have been now well embarked on an effort to destroy every aspect of what makes the United States different from the course of human history. We have seen our history attacked, our documents, our Constitution, our values, our principles. We have seen every institution weaponized, everything that made us unique, including our culture, which is under absolute assault. We have seen everything deteriorated, attacked, destroyed, to make us like everyone else. Joe Biden's Department of Justice under Merrick Garland, employing a special prosecutor in Jack Smith, bringing relatively minor charges, unprecedented in terms of applying them to a former president, and unprecedented in throwing the book at this type of violation, much less pursuing it at all, has walked down a path that is foreign to us in the United States of America, but is common in foreign countries. What we are becoming, sadly, if we see this pursued, a former president pursued by his political opponent, thrown into the court system, and potentially jailed, is the United States once again becoming just like everyone else. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.